Now then, the UK will be directly negotiating with the Taliban to help get people out of the country. That's what the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said after meetings in Qatar this morning. He described it as an important first test in the Taliban's relationship with the West, but said the government would not be recognising the militant group at any time in the foreseeable future.
Look, we are pragmatic and realistic. We don't recognise governments. We will not be recognising the Taliban, but we do see the need to be able to have direct engagement. Otherwise, we can't provide messages, we can't listen to the response. And I think, as my friend Sheikh Mohammed said, I think there were some early tests for the Taliban. One was their approach to the airport during the evacuation. Now we're into a different space. Can we see safe passage provided out of Afghanistan? That will be quite an important first test. We need to be able to discuss that or engage on that. And there'll be other issues. We all want to avoid a humanitarian disaster or crisis. Well, that will require the Taliban to be able to provide and ensure a permissive climate and environment for aid workers. So I think engagement will be important in order to set early tests, and what we'll be judging the Taliban by is their actions, not their words.
Well, the Taliban has previously suggested that people would be able to leave with the correct documentation when civilian flights resume. And today they said the airport in Kabul will be reopening for domestic flights tomorrow. Qatar's foreign minister said his country is trying to help get the airport open for international flights.
It's a very important and a very strong statement if Taliban will demonstrate their commitment to provide safe passage and freedom of movement for the people of Afghanistan. So we will do our best. We are engaging with them, engaging with also Turkey if they can provide any technical assistance on that front. And hopefully in the next few days we will hear some good news.
Dr. Andreas Krieg is a Middle East expert at King's College London. He spent many years in Qatar, where he's been involved in talks between the Gulf state and the UK's Ministry of Defence. Dr. Krieg, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, Qatar is playing such an interesting role here. We know it's close to the Taliban, but it's also very close to the UK, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, Qatar and the UK have a very strong relationship in a variety of different ways. Definitely in the military domain, the UK has the Royal Air Force has the only joint squadron with the Qatari Armed Forces and the Qatari Air Force. There's a very strong economic relationship with a lot of Qatari investments in the UK, as well as for the UK, the most important provider of gas is actually Qatar. So Qatar kind of keeps the lights on in the UK. So it's a very strategic relationship that goes back quite a long while, and it's based on mutual trust.
Okay, so then what about its relationship with the Taliban? How much influence do they have?
Well, that's the big question mark. I mean, Qatar has positioned itself from early on as a neutral player. They were asked in 2010 by the Americans to kind of host the Taliban, and they've done so, and they've always seen this as a part of supporting the US strategy in Afghanistan. But being a neutral player also means that they never used any leverage to kind of coerce or pressure the Taliban into any decision making, but have used any good office that they have in a more accommodating way to kind of get the Taliban to do things. And so far, actually, we've seen, at least based on the narrative that's come out of the political office in Doha and those who are now leading the Taliban movement in Afghanistan on the ground, we see that the country's impressing of narratives about being more inclusive in terms of governance, allowing women to work, and kind of providing an amnesty for government workers. All these narratives are kind of the result of the country's impressing on the Taliban that if they want to govern and if they want to have access to foreign aid, they need to change. And to some extent, I mean, this already is a first result of Qatari engagement. So you could say that the countries do have some influence, but whether they have control is a different matter. And that also has a lot to do with the fact that obviously the political leadership might not control what people do on the ground.
Well, exactly. I was going to say it's been very good for what you might call the sort of PR message coming from the leadership, but that, of course, may not feed through to what happens on the ground at all.
Absolutely. And those people who bore the burden of conflict over the last couple of years, who were fighting on the ground, which were not the guys represented in Doha, in the Doha office, who are not leading the kind of comfortable lifestyle in the Gulf, they're the ones who kind of call the shots, at least on the ground. So it remains to be seen to what extent the political leadership can now translate whatever they're talking about in public in terms of actions on the ground.
You talk about Qatar as a neutral player, but all countries are motivated by something, whatever it is that they want out of a situation. So what is in it for the Qataris?
Well, I mean, Qatar, unlike the UK, the US, or even other Gulf players, doesn't see Afghanistan as essentially linked to, national security. For them, Afghanistan, obviously, stability in Afghanistan is important for the region. But for the Qataris, whatever happened in Afghanistan was always a way to buying credit in Washington. So whatever the Qataris were doing was always somewhat piggybacking along what the Americans were doing. And their policy and engagement with the Taliban was always about influence in Washington and building networks in Washington and becoming this kind of indispensable partner for the United States, but also now more increasingly increasingly also for Western partners in Europe. So the UK, other European partners, all engaging with Qatar as being the go-to guy and interlocutor to do anything in Afghanistan. And that's always what the Qataris wanted. It's a small state kind of sandwich between two great powers, Saudi and Iran, in an insecure environment. And all they need is relationships to kind of monopolize, to kind of secure itself.
Dr. Andreas Krieg, thank you very much.